months, Joe's been bringing in some of the college life leaders to help kind of walk you through the last few chapters of the book of John. And today is the last one. Today, Tyler Young's going to come and talk to us about a passage that means a lot to him. Tyler's a junior exercise bio major at UC Davis, and he's kind of legendary as the quarterback of the epic college life IM football team that is just ruled for the 3 years he's been there. But kind of more importantly, Tyler was a leader in college life since the minute he walked in the door. As a freshman, he went through the Stevens Master training and integrated immediately with the church, and then kind of brought that training and said, we really should do something like this at college life. We should have a mechanism where we can care for people. And he's always really cared about people who are hurting. And I think he'll catch a little of that in his talk this morning. So Tyler,
So imagine with me a dream home on a gorgeous beachfront property, 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom, and wraparound decks. This stunning home has a beautiful view of the ocean. This would be something like the view out your back window. Now it's Saturday, so you have no school or anything planned, which means you're not going to be jolted awake by your annoying alarm. But instead, you get to wake up to a nice, soft, cool breeze, like an angel saying good morning with a kiss on the cheek. So you go to the kitchen, grab your cup of coffee, freshly brewed coffee, of course, because you have one of those fancy machines you can program to have coffee ready for you when you wake up in the morning. Anyways, so you grab your cup of coffee, taking a deep breath of ocean air, and walk out the back door. And today is especially beautiful, so you casually stroll along the beach, admiring a stunning sunrise over the unending horizon. And then you feel the wind start to pick up. Things seem to slow down a bit as the overwhelming beauty gets your heart beating faster and faster. Well, maybe actually that's the coffee that's finally starting to kick in. It's making your heart beat faster. Then all of a sudden you realize that's not the coffee. No, your heart is racing because you hear what sounds like a forest of trees coming crashing down behind you. And maybe it was that palm tree you just walked by. So quickly you turn to look to make sure you're not about to be crushed by this tree. But no tree near you is making that sound. So you start to breathe a sigh of relief. But quickly that air is taken out of your lungs when you realize, as you look down to the horizon, that you see your beautiful home tumbling down from the wind and being swept away by the sea. There it goes. Now, if you're anything like me, you're thinking, come on, Tyler, I'm smarter than that. I've read Sermon on the Mount, and I know not to build my house on the sand. But I'm saying, yes, your house wasn't built on the sand, but it also wasn't built to endure the storms. My engineering buddies tell me that there are two things you have to account for when building a house: static and dynamic load. The static load has to do with finding a good site. That's the metaphor of building on Christ. But finding the right site isn't enough. You also have to plan for the dynamic loads. Can your structure withstand the stress of the storms? In our little parable, the builders did not take into account all the facts about the house, what the house would have to endure. They thought they could just build the house in the right place and everything would be fine. But our house has to be built on the foundation of knowing what kind of weather it will battle. We have to prepare. We can be engineers that plan to fight the storms and the waves as they chip away. Because you see, too often we think that if we just build our lives on God's rock of foundation, like the Bible tells us, we will never experience the storm. That if we do everything right, our lives will be happy and safe and mostly free from tragedy and pain. We want to believe that trouble will never come our way. But that is not the promise. This world is beautiful, but it is also broken. Jesus actually promises that if we root ourselves in him, we will not be shaken. This means that we will be able to withstand the storms, but it does not mean we will never experience them. We need not only build on the right foundation, but build to withstand the range of unexpected things that can shake us. And that's where we're going today. This morning we will talk about how to remain unshakable in the storms of life. In other words, how do we have peace in times of trouble? Now our passage this morning offers us 3 promises to help us prepare for hard times. And if we just understand these promises, we will be able to have peace in times of trouble. The passage is John 16, 25 through 33. And it's the last dialogue between Jesus and his disciples. After this passage, Jesus prays to God and then is betrayed by Judas and crucified. For now, let's start with John 16, 25. And then later today, we'll talk more about what happens after. I'll give you a second to turn to John 16, 25 if you haven't done so already. Now, as I read this passage, see if you can pick up the 3 promises God makes, and they will come towards the end. In verse 25, Jesus says, "Though I have been speaking figuratively, a time is coming when I will no longer use this kind of language, but tell you plainly about my Father. In that day you will ask in my name. I am not saying that I will ask the Father on your behalf. No, the Father himself loves you because you have loved me and believe I came from God. I came from the Father and entered the world. Now I am leaving the world and going back to the Father." Then Jesus' disciples said, "Now you're speaking clearly, without figures of speech. Now we can see that you know all things, and you do not even need to have anyone ask you questions. This makes us believe you came from God." "Do you now believe?" Jesus replied. And now look for these 3 promises in the next verse. "A time is coming, and in fact has come, when you will each be scattered, each to your own home. You will leave me all alone, yet I am not alone, for my Father is with me. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." Did you catch that last verse? Look again at what it says. In this world you will have trouble. Not that you might, or every 1 in 100 experience trouble. Not that only stupid, unlucky, or unspiritual people will have trouble, but rather you will, I will, and we will all experience trouble. So our first promise that Jesus gives us in this passage is that we will have trouble. And it's not a promise people usually talk about, because let's face it, it's not very encouraging. Trouble does not discriminate based on race, gender, how much money you have, what college you go to, and so on. We cannot hide, try as we might, living in comfortable, safe America, and you don't have to look very hard to find that we live in a world of pain and suffering. Watch the news, or even pick up a newspaper. Yeah, some people still print those. And you will see stories about people dying from bullets to cancer, children being sold into slavery, innocent bystanders being killed in a Mother's Day parade, and the list goes on. And while it can sometimes be easier to see and understand that bad things happen to other people in the world, especially if they have done and made bad choices, what's harder is to realize that trouble will happen to us. We tend to question God when trouble comes our way, as if it's his fault. But we must understand that those names in the news, in a split second, could be people in our lives. It could be our loved one that doesn't come home. But don't get me wrong, I think it's good to come to God with difficult questions. And I'll admit that during one of the hardest times in my life, I questioned God too. The summer before my freshman year of high school, my family and I were vacationing in Lake Tahoe. My grandpa was working on the water heater one night when he collapsed. His heart had failed. I remember sitting helplessly at my mother's side as she gave CPR to her own father. Then the paramedics arrived and they airlifted him to the hospital in Reno in a coma from which he would never wake up. I was devastated. It felt like somebody had knocked the wind out of me. It seemed like I had nobody to lean on at the time. Not that I didn't go to my parents, but they were going through it all at the same time, so it was kind of hard to go to them. During that week, I had a lot of time to reflect while going back and forth from Tahoe to Reno. And I remember it being especially hard to pray constantly for healing, only to drive almost an hour every day to find no signs of improvement. It felt like God was gone, and He didn't hear my cries. Afterwards, I was upset at God for taking my grandfather from me, and questioned why He would do such a thing, especially since my grandfather was young and had so much left out for the world. I was furious about the situation. But if you asked me about the world we lived in, I would have had no problem admitting it was broken. Do you see the problem here? It was okay for the world to be broken, just as long as it was not my world that was broken. And this is what we have to let soak in. That our world is broken. And Jesus says, in this world, you will have trouble. One day, that trouble will come knocking at your door and mine. However, our society teaches us that we can avoid trouble if we just build up a fortress of money and good deeds. And if those fail, we can always fall back on fake smiles, and it's all good, man. Or it could be worse, or anything that doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. But we know that's not true. We know that material wealth doesn't last forever. We know that bad things don't only happen when you deserve it. That our world is not run on karma. Just because I read my Bible and pray in the morning, or go to church on Sunday, does not protect me from harm. And on the flip side of that, I can't blame my lack of righteousness as the reason I experience trouble. For example, I must not think that my poor performance on a test was because I did not wake up and read my Bible that morning. Life is not a manipulation of God's will. Doing good things for God doesn't mean He gives us what we want. I should spend time with God to grow our relationship, not for Him to get me into my #1 college. Now I know you're probably thinking, that was rough. Let's bring Rebecca back. She was funny and inspiring. But the scriptures are not meant to make you feel good. They're meant to train you for reality. And thankfully, the verse does not end after those first 7 words. Because if it did, I would just pack up and go home. But Jesus tells us these things so that we may have peace. How does knowing trouble will come bring peace? Remember that I said if we want to have peace in times of trouble, we need to know the promises of God. Promises, plural, with an S. The first one, it's trouble. It's not the sort of verse you'll find on bumper stickers or refrigerators or Facebook memes. But it does not stand alone. Let's look for the second promise. You see, Jesus is a realist. He doesn't live in a fantasy world. He lives in our beautiful, yet broken world. He wants to care for us and redeem us in this world. Now, the first promise, it's about brokenness. He wants to make sure that we're not blindsided by that. But he also has a couple promises about beauty. And his second promise for today is that we will never be alone. Let's learn from the disciples about God's promise that we will never be alone. Jesus goes on to tell them that they will scatter and leave him during the darkest hour. Everything the disciples knew would be shattered in an instant. Look at what Jesus says in verse 32. A time is coming, and in fact has come, when you will be scattered, each to your own home. So obviously, from what Jesus said, the disciples were warned about the trouble, but yet they still fled. They were not ready for what was about to happen, and they freaked out. And often we too can have this experience. We think God is right beside us, and then maybe we're blinded by life, even if just for a second. And we freak out. It's like a spiritual game of peekaboo. Like an infant, when we lose eye contact with Jesus, we get scared and cry or do whatever babies do. They freak out and they lose sight of their parents. This peekaboo phenomenon has actually been studied a lot, and it's called object permanence. Here's an example of the object permanence phenomenon.
See the ball? Where did it go? Where is it? Where's the ball? There it is! We found it! Yay! Let me see. Where's the ball? See it? Where'd the ball go? Where is it? There it is. See the ball? Where did it go? Mama doesn't have it. There it is. Yay! We'll do it one more time. Where is it? Did it disappear? Where did it go? There it is. Yay!
Infants only believe the things that are right in front of them. If their vision is just a little obscured, they suddenly stop believing it exists and they throw a fit. In our own little way, sometimes we can just be grown-up versions of that. We think that because we can't see God, He can't see us. This can lead us to running aimlessly and afraid. But our passage today rejects the myth that if God is out of sight, He is gone. There is a promise of trouble, and it can seem like God is distant. But thankfully, there is also a promise that God will never leave us alone. At the end of verse 32, Jesus goes on to tell His disciples, "And you will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, for the Father is with me." How awesome is our God? And maybe you're thinking, yeah, I've heard that before. But sometimes I just don't feel like God is with me. And don't worry, you're definitely not alone for feeling this way. You see, Jesus promises that God will never leave us alone. But notice what He doesn't promise. He doesn't say we will never feel alone. Let's break that down for a second. The only word added was feel. What's the deal with feelings? You see, feelings are strong emotions that can often cloud our judgment if we're not careful. In order to be ready to battle trouble, we must realize that feelings are a reaction to the events in our life. Feelings do not always reflect what is true. For example, you might feel like nobody remembered your birthday, when actually they've been planning a surprise for months. And that's a silly example of how feelings don't always reflect the truth. And while we might not always be able to control how our feelings react to certain events, what we can control is how we react to our feelings. I hope you understand what a great encouragement it is of knowing God will never abandon us, even when our feelings and our emotions try to convince us that He doesn't love us or that He has left us on our own. My desire is that we combine our knowledge of promised trouble with the fact that God is not going to give up on us. When we want to give up on ourselves and our difficult lives, my prayer is that we can see through the fog of emotions and misleading feelings that God has abandoned us. However, knowing that trouble is coming and that God will never leave us amidst our trouble is only half the story of having peace in hard times. The story is unfulfilled if we stop here. What we are missing is hope. Which brings us to our third and most startling promise. Promise 3. Jesus overcame the world. So glance back at the passage one more time with me. Jesus says in verse 33, I have told you these things, so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So from this we get our final promise. It's the best promise of all that will give us peace in times of trouble. It is that Jesus overcame the world. This passage is not talking about today's watered-down version of hope. It's not a wishful thinking type of hope. Like, oh, I hope the Giants win the World Series again. But rather, my hope is found in knowing my God saves, and that Jesus suffered so that as long as I entrust my life to Him and Him alone, I can have eternal life in His presence. As we talked about earlier today, Jesus was in His darkest hour. He was beaten, tortured, and hung on a cross to be mocked by the world. Betrayed and abandoned by those closest to Him. It seemed as if God had left Him to die. But we know that is not the case. Jesus' death on the cross was all part of a bigger plan. The plan was bigger than any of the disciples or witnesses could comprehend. All the turmoil, pain, and trouble Jesus had endured would bear fruit within 3 days. Jesus went through more trouble than we could ever understand. And that is why He says, have peace, because He has overcome it all, including death. Now think of it like this. You're pitching in the 9th inning of a tight ball game with a slim lead. And try as you might, you feel like the game is getting away from you. There's sluggers coming to the plate, and he's about ready to knock home the winning run. And your arm feels like rubber. You lost your fastball an inning ago, and your curveball can't find that strike zone. You're in a hostile stadium where the whole crowd seems like they're breathing down your neck, hoping that you will mess up. Your hands are so sweaty at this point, you can't even find a grip on the ball. So the manager comes out of the dugout. And being kind and wanting his starting pitcher to throw a complete game, he asks you if you think you can finish the game. And in that moment of desperation, what do you tell him? I don't think I can make it, coach. So then he asks, well, who then do you trust to come in and close this one out and deal with the runners you've left on base? So what do you tell him? I want Jesus to save this one, coach. So Jesus comes down from the pen, standing atop a hill and taking the ball in the net. He says, don't worry, guys. I'll get us out of trouble. And it may not be the way you expected, like striking out the side in order, but guess what? He never blows a save. The enemy might have a few broken bat singles, and it could feel like torture. But Jesus never loses in the end. He has the perfect save percentage. All we have to do is give him the ball. Because when we give Jesus the ball, He saves the day. When we give Jesus our troubles, He comes to rescue us. And He overcomes them. And it may not be pretty or how we'd expect, but He shows up just as He promises. And so, after a few months, you've come to the end of the book of John. And with the end, we see Jesus coming into the game when it all seems lost and securing the W. In the resurrection, He shuts down sin and pain and hurt and death. All the trouble He promises in the first part of the verse, He remakes into something beautiful by overcoming death and promising the same for us. And this is why I find myself constantly clinging to the cross as my hope. It's a symbol of unimaginable pain and torture. But through Jesus' redemption, the cross is now a symbol of hope, of life beyond the pain of this world. It's a sign that God is bigger than any evil Satan can dish out. And it's a sign of a peace that cannot be crushed. Because beyond the cross is the resurrection. Jesus doesn't just ask for the ball, he executes. He doesn't just promise he can overcome, but he does it in walk-off fashion. You see, this isn't just an empty promise that things will get better. No, he's got the fastball to back it up. He has the power to overcome death and evil and remake all the terrible things this broken world sends your way. And this is what I want my life hope rooted in. Something that cannot be taken away from me. Jesus is the stable rock we need to tie our lives to. He says he overcame the world and conquered death. No sports team, college degree, job, girlfriend or boyfriend has ever done that, nor ever will. Nothing else is worthy of us investing our hope and our lives in. So today I said, in order to have peace in times of trouble, we need to realize 3 promises of God. First, that we will have trouble. Second, that we will never be alone. And finally, that Jesus overcame the world. My final thought is this. Isaiah 40:31 says, "But those that hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." Hope just doesn't make us feel better. It isn't a band-aid for our sadness. But it gives us the power to live an effective and passionate life, unafraid. It frees us to get the most out of life. How refreshing does that sound? Let's remember that in hard times. Remember that our times of trouble can resemble what Jesus went through. And that by sharing in his suffering, even if just a little, we can share in his ultimate glory. When life gets rough, stand on the one thing that cannot be swept away. That Jesus is the Son of God. He died for my sins and overcame death so that I have eternal hope in him, even when my broken world is crashing down and being swept away by the sea. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you for overcoming the world. I ask that we may be strengthened by the hope that we have in you, and that no matter what this broken world sends our way, we praise you, God, for never leaving us.